Hello, my name is Michael Ansell, and I'd like to talk in a bit more detail about the historic and linguistic background of the Borg Peninsula field names. Some interesting field names themselves and what such field names can tell us about the past. I would like at the start to acknowledge the work of our own resident place name expert in the area, Alan James, who lives in Gatehouse. Alan has patiently analysed all the field names, 1,000 of them, in a very thorough way, and these analyses can be found on the website that John Craig will talk about a bit later. This slide here is taken from Alison Burns' PhD on North East Scottish field names in 2015. And the statement nicely summarises the situation as I see it, and obviously as Alison saw it. Essentially, not many areas have had their field names collected, let alone analysed. New owners tend to change the old names regularly, and increasingly rather dull and boring field numbers are replacing the old field names. So time is running out to collect them. From my own experience, I was talking to a farmer of Annabaglish on the Wigton Moors. That's on the map, Ordnance Survey First Edition map, you can see there. And asked them what the names of the fields are on the two drumlins called there Knockietai and Knockietor. Now the farmer didn't actually know the names for those drumlins any longer. The ones that are recorded on the first edition map here, and in terms of the field names, he simply called them Silage Field 1 and Silage Field 2. So these fields no doubt had older names, but they've been lost, unfortunately. But back to Borg, and thinking about the character of the Borg field names themselves. The agricultural landscape of that peninsula is largely the product of the era of agricultural improvement, dating from around the middle of the 18th century. This is General Roy's military survey of the 1750s, a map extract thereof. You can find all these on the National Library of Scotland website, showing the area around Borg itself, which is clearly in the process of enclosure, with the old open field system surviving alongside newer rectangular field enclosures. So it rather follows from this that the field names as we have them today, and the fields as we have them today, date from this period, by which time Scots would have become the predominant naming language, with English becoming increasingly common, and Gaelic having died out a few hundred years before. Borg has, of course, seen many languages contribute to its field and place names, starting with Brittonic, Old English, Old Norse, Gaelic, Scots, and nowadays English. All these languages have contributed to the field name landscape that we see now, and some of them have contributed loanwords and the name of pre-improvement landscape features to the Scots and English field name formations that we see today. We'll come to this in a second. So I guess there are field names and field names, different types of them, and the way I would classify them is into primary and secondary. Primary field names are normally pretty transparent, like Muckle Park, quite often incorporating borrowed words from particularly Gaelic down here, sometimes Norse. Secondary field names, however, are basically recycling of existing place names or they could have been pre-existing field names swept away by the agricultural improvements. So, for example, a small hill like Knocktall. Most of these pre-existing names were recorded on the Ordnance Survey, first edition 6-inch to the mile map, surveyed around 1850. But the project has captured some otherwise unrecorded names for topographical features. For example, Laganori, a field name on Rainton. Just looking at these types of field names in a bit more detail, taking again the area around Borg itself, the blue circled field names are primary formations in Scots and English. As I said, fairly transparent. For example, right in the middle there, we've got Liggets. There's a Scots term. To quote MacTaggart's Galavidian Encyclopedia, published in 1824, a man from Borg. Liggets is a small wooden gate, usually self-closing, a swing gate, frequently one shutting off pasture from one arable field from another. The yellow circles are Scots field names, but which incorporate a topographical term borrowed from Gaelic. So, for example, Drime, meaning a bank or a ridge, or Dalloch, a Scots term deriving from Gaelic Dal, and described again by MacTaggart in his encyclopedia as a flat of land. The secondary names are shown in red, i.e. these are pre-existing place names that have been repurposed as field names. And you can see some examples there. The Wheelie, Willie Houston, I won't say more about those, we'll come back to them later. Mossfeather, Corse Martin, these are all pre-existing Gaelic topographical features that have been reused as field names. Thinking about the Gaelic influence on Borg field names, it's the most significant of the pre-Scots and English contribution, if I can put it that way. And as I said a minute ago, the way that Gaelic words subsist in field names today are through words being borrowed into Scots and then used in field names, or pre-existing Gaelic place names being appropriated. I'd just like to spend a few minutes looking at the Gaelic contribution to these Borg field names in a bit more detail. If we look at the Gaelic words borrowed into Scots and then used in field names, these are represented by the pink fields here. You're not supposed to see the individual details of the fields, it's too large a scale for that, but illustrated in the bottom left, you can see the frequency of the different elements that we find here. So there are 32 field names incorporating drum from Drime, a ridge, for example, Moss Drum, Swine Drum, 21 incorporating Scots bar from Gaelic bar, top of anything. So field names would manifest themselves like back bar, bar shore. Some slightly less usual field names. There are 9 examples where Scots seems to have borrowed the Gaelic word for a plain or a field, macher, and it turns up here as mar or mahar. And there are 9 examples of those, interestingly enough. Also quite interesting that there seems to have been a borrowing of Cluine, a meadow, and there are 4 field names in Clane, Big and Wee Clane, Saul's Clane, etc. Other borrowed elements include Loch, Doon, Creck, Inish, Bot, Clachan, Fiche, a single example of the last one, which is a field normally in front of the house, where quite often it's easy to keep an eye on sick animals and so on. Existing Gaelic place names repurposed and used as field names. There are a lot of these as well. You can see these are the blue elements here. Just some examples. We've got a couple of fields called Barney, which probably derive from Gaelic Bjarna, a gap. We can compare Barney Water in the Glen Kens as another example of that. The Cubbucks, Coolbach, the Corner Bend. Compare the Cubbucks in Balmaclellan of the same meaning, and Cullibackie in Craigs Parish in County Antrim, which is the same name but with a definite article. Risk from Riask, Amur, Fenner and Marsh. Knockmuck, there's a couple of these referring, a couple of fields named Knockmuck referring to the same topographical feature, Crochmuch, Swine Hill. Kildarach from Culia Darach and Oakwood. Again, it shows you how these names can be used to give evidence as to past landscapes. Barn-Kirky up more towards the A75 in the north. Barn and Kirke, the hilltop of the Oats. And a very common place name in the south of Scotland, certainly southwest, that is, Dromore, either spelt with a U or an O, an O in this occasion, from Andrime Moor, the Big Ridge. Extremely common place name. So putting those together, we can see that the pink and the blue cover a fair chunk of the fieldscape of Borg, showing that there was quite a high Gaelic influence in and around that time when the fields were being named. And this fits really with the pattern. If you look at the vocabulary in MacTaggart's Galavidian Encyclopedia of 1824, there's a pretty high content of Gaelic originated Scots words in there. So I'd like to move to the last bit by looking at some otherwise unrecorded field names and have a look at them in more detail. The first one is one called Flettic. Flettic Craigs, in fact, on Ingleston. Now this is a very intriguing place name. I should say that in looking at these in detail, we need to give a bit of a health warning that often these field names are the only source of information, only source of those names. There's no other trail of historic documented forms. So of necessity, anything we say about them has to be to some extent speculative. But this is a very interesting one. It may just be a jumbling of Scots, flecket for flecked or spotted. However, it's not a common descriptor to be used of fields, but if the craigs there do have a pied look, then that could be the origin. However, if flettic, not flecket, is the authentic form, then a parallel could be a lost field name in Birchholme in Cumberland. The second element there being likely to be Flettic, Mairi in the Cumbric language, the Brittonic language akin to Old Welsh spoken in Cumbria and Galloway until superseded by Gaelic probably in the 9th to 10th centuries. The THL in Polthletic is a relic of the unvoiced L sound, spelt double L in Welsh. That sound was only beginning to develop shortly before the Cumbric or Brittonic language here went extinct and was replaced by Gaelic. So if Flettic was Flettic, it could have been the name of the wee burn flowing through the marshy part of this field below the craigs. It would be quite exciting, wouldn't it, to find a name that may have survived for more than 1,000 years. But like I say, it has to be a very speculative proposition. Moving further on with speculation, looking at a couple of fields bearing the name Whosney. These fields lie along the Aylesford Burn from the Kirkcudbright Road southwards, and they have fairly modern names, i.e. roadside and middle, but on estate maps of 1819, the two fields were named North and South Whosney, and in 1780, the whole, again on an estate map, the whole area was called Whosney. Again, an intriguing name, very likely or possible to be Northumbrian, Old English or Old Norse origin. The second syllable is likely to be Old English A or Old Norse A, both meaning primarily island, but used in place names for relatively dry land, wholly or partly surrounded by wetland. Although by the 1850 survey there had been evidently substantial draining of the land to the east and south where Aylesford and Cleuch burns joined to become the Corriford burn, and all of these have been straightened and partly rerouted. In earlier times this would probably have been boggy, flood-prone ground. Alan James's best guess for the first element would be Wassan, the genitive of Old English wassa, alluvial land prone to flooding. So Whosney would be the dry ground partly surrounded by flood-prone land. So from a possible Old English or Northumbrian or Old Norse field name to another potentially Brittonic one. Papples. This is a field name recorded in the list created by Adam Gray, as mentioned by Rachel. But it's not precisely located, except to say it's somewhere on the Earlston Gled Park or Glenterry. And again, it's a very interesting name. Alan James speculates that it might have been what are now known as the Gypsy Fields. Papples could preserve a Brittonic word of reasonably certain Latin origin, papilio, meaning a butterfly. And the vernacular Latin word papilio, perhaps soldier slang recorded from the early 3rd century onwards. It was used for tent, and so for a wide range of temporary buildings used in classical and medieval times. It was adopted into Brittonic as papil, which evolved to Welsh pebble, a camp, and Gaelic pubal, a tent. Now, could this Brittonic Cumbric words have survived in the Galloway Romany language? This word itself is found in several place names in southern Scotland, including Pibble in the Fleet Cree watershed, Popples Hill in Wigtonshire, Moss Peeble in Dumfriesshire, Cairn Papple in West Lothian, Papple in East Lothian, and best known of all, Peebles. There are some 10 examples in Wales, and it seems to be unknown in Cornwall or Brittany. In the north, it seems to usually refer to temporary bothies used in connection with summer grazings, or rather to the sites where these were regularly erected, either shielings in the hills or assembly places where livestock was gathered and perhaps traded in spring and autumn, as at Peebles, which became the site of a great fair and livestock market in the Middle Ages. But again, a stopping place for travelling folk could have been given this name. And from the Brittonic possibility here to another potential Anglo-Scandinavian place name or field name, Hacknoose. The large field now called the Kennel, beside Brighouse Bay, was given the very interesting alternative by Adam Gray, Hacknoose, or Head of the Rocks. This must refer to the rocks on the shore below the southern part of this field. Hackness, the North Yorkshire site of an early Anglo-Saxon nunnery, was Hacknoose, hook-shaped headland, noticing that having been replaced by the variant form Ness, but had it survived, it would have become Hack Noose, as in our example here. The topography of the bay has changed through the centuries with lowering of sea level and rising sand dunes, but the tide-covered rocks below this field do indeed form a hook shape, strikingly visible in the first edition Ordnance Survey map. There's another even more intriguing possibility. Hack might be a rare survival of a Scandinavian-influenced form hack of Old English, hatch, with the specific meaning a fish trap. This word is evidenced in Middle and Early Modern English word for a fish trap, i.e. a hacking. Noose could still be nose headland as suggested, but it might refer metaphorically to a trap where fish were caught in an ever-tightening space, a method used at the docks of Tonglen until the 19th century. Hack Noose then does seem to be likely to be a precious relic of a nearly lost name that may well go back to Northumbrian Old English or the Anglo-Scandinavian dialect of the later first millennium. Now back to Gaelic for my last example. The Willie Houston is a field northwest of the Kirkland at Carlton, and the Wheelie extends northwest from Carlton Farm. The two are separated by Horse Park, and the fields are all with straight dikes, so very much implying improvement and closure. Now, when Rachel was collecting these field names, there was an explanation for one of them, I forget which, that there was an old mill wheel in the barn. But notwithstanding that, it's very likely that both these field names preserve Gaelic buale, cattle fold. A vuale with the definite article would have sounded to Scots speakers much like a wheelie. The BH sound is very often pronounced with a W sound in certain Gaelic dialects. Suggests that that was the case here, as it was in Isle of Man. And following a distinguishing name with less stress like Willie, it would have sounded like wheelie. Following the rules of Scottish Gaelic, we might expect buale without the definite article in a qualified phrase, so Billy rather than Willie, Houston. But in the Gaelic of the Isle of Man, almost within sight of Carlton, that rule was evidently not strictly followed, as evidenced by field names like Willie Kernan and Woolly Fail. We also have Willie Anna on the Cairnsmore of Carstfairn and the Glen Kens, not so far away. In terms of Willie Houston, the specific here would be a person's name, an anglicised form of Gaelic Uistgen, Wee Hugh. So this field was distinguished from the other one as Buala Uistgen, Houston's cattle fold, or Wee Hugh's cattle fold. So I hope that these more detailed examples have shown you the type of precious relics potentially the project has uncovered and located. And there are more interesting ones than I've had time to illustrate here. I just finished on one slide illustrating that with the 1,000 or so names that have been collected, they are a tremendous window into the past. They've been digitally mapped, analysed, and are therefore a huge resource. You can categorise them in different ways. This slide just shows them some of the major classifications, most of which are pretty workaday, but they all can tell us more about landscape and the people who lived and farmed there. So I'd encourage any of you who are listening or watching this out there to get out there while there's still time and collect the field names in your local area.